Hey, tonight we drift down a darkened Nile, the moon spilling a path of silver across the water, as if someone has quietly unrolled a ribbon just for you. The air is warm but not stifling, perfumed with the faint sweetness of lotus blossoms. Drifting from the riverbanks, the boats beneath your feet sways gently, creaking like an old storyteller clearing their throat before a secret. You'll probably learn a lot from this story, not just about what went on behind those massive stone walls, but about how power, faith, and a little bit of theater kept the whole thing running for thousands of years. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. Press the notification bell to update many new videos, and I'd love to know, drop your location and your local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your boatman, a lean man in a rough linen kilt, doesn't talk much. His oar dips silently into the water, pulling you closer to the hulking shadow ahead. The temple's facade is barely visible, yet already impossible to ignore two massive pylons. Dark against the starlit sky, their outlines sharp as if drawn by the gods themselves. Every so often, a torch flame flickers from somewhere high up, casting a quick glint on polished sandstone before vanishing. As the shore draws near, the sounds change. The low whisper of water against the hull gives way to distant chantings, low, rhythmic, as if the very river is humming along. The beat of a drum thumps like a lazy heartbeat. Somewhere, a sistrum rattles, its bright metallic chime cutting through the night air. This, you realize, isn't just some random night in ancient Egypt. You've arrived during a festival, one of the few times when the inner mysteries spill outward, just enough for the common people to catch a glimpse. And yes, you're about to walk right into it. You step onto a stone dock. The ground is still warm from the day's heat, though the night breeze from the Nile cools your skin. Ahead, the temple looms taller than you'd imagined. The walls stretch upward like cliffs, their faces carved with scenes of pharaohs presenting offerings to gods with hawk heads, jackal heads, and more than a few whose names you're not entirely sure you could pronounce. Some figures are painted in still bright colors, deep lapis blues, rich ochres, gleaming golds, though here and there the paint has flaked. Like old makeup on an immortal face. Your guide, if you can call the boatman that hands you a small clay token stamped with an ink. It's your pass to enter. He doesn't say where he got it, and you don't ask. Sometimes mystery is better than detail. As you walk toward the towering gateway, you notice something peculiar at the base of the pylons. Rows of small square holes pockmark the stone. Historians still argue whether these were for scaffolding during construction, for holding banners, or, my personal favorite theory, for housing sacred pigeons that acted as a kind of divine security alarm. Imagine being stopped at the temple gate because the resident pigeons didn't like your vibe. You pass the first torch stands, the light painting your shadow across the wall like some elongated ghost. The air smells of eccentricness and sharp, with a sweet undercurrent of myrrh beneath it, the earthy, damp scent of the Nile. Every few steps, you catch another sound, the distant splash of a ceremonial libation, the crackle of a torch, the whisper of linen robes brushing stone. By the time you stand at the base of the pylons, your neck is craned so far back it almost aches. The gods carved here are colossal. One panel shows Horus presenting a looped rope to the pharaoh binding heaven and earth together. Another shows the goddess Hathor offering a sistrum, as if the music itself keeps the world spinning. You can't help but wonder if the artistry was meant more for the gods or for people like you, standing here slack-jawed in awe. A guard steps forward. He's broad-shouldered, his shaven head gleaming in the torchlight, his kilt starched to an almost absurd crispness. He eyes your token, then you, as though weighing whether the gods would actually care if you entered. After a heartbeat that feels like a century, he steps aside without a word. Beyond the gate, the first courtyard yawns open, but you don't move yet. You take one last look over your shoulder. Out there, the Nile gleams under the moon, a ribbon unrolling into the horizon. Somewhere upriver, another boat might be approaching, another visitor arriving with wide eyes and a head full of questions. For now, though, this journey is yours, and just to break the solemnity for a moment, you do mentally note that the guards' sandals were pretty stylish. Ancient Egyptian fashion may not have had sneakers, but those leather straps could easily come back into vogue. You step forward into the shadow of the pylons. The festival drums beat on, slow and steady. The night swallows you, but in the way a blanket swallows you when you're finally ready to sleep warm, heavy and full of promise. The ground beneath your feet changes texture as soon as you step fully past the pylons from the open dock's sun-warmed stone to cool, meticulously laid flagstones worn smooth by centuries of sandals. Your eyes adjust to the deepening shadow. The high walls on either side block most of the moonlight, leaving you in a narrow canyon of stone. The echo of your footsteps feels oddly loud here, bouncing back with a hollow ring that makes you instinctively slow your pace. Two guards stand ahead, not in the open, but tucked slightly into the wall's recesses. They don't move until you're nearly upon them, and when they do, it's with a slow, deliberate shift, like statues deciding, after much consideration, to come alive. Their tunics are plain compared to the painted reliefs towering above them, but the short spears in their hands gleam in the torchlight. One speaks, his voice low and gravelly. You bear the token. You hold it out, trying to appear casual, though your pulse feels loud in your ears. He takes it, runs his thumb over the carved ankh, then hands it back. His partner says nothing, but his gaze lingers a fraction too long on your sandals as, though judging whether they've been appropriately purified. Yes, in ancient Egypt, footwear could be a theological issue. Shoes that had touched impure ground might need to be ritually cleaned before crossing certain thresholds. Historians still argue whether that was more about hygiene or symbolism. Either way, you make a mental note. Next time, maybe don't step in that suspicious puddle by the dock. You pass between them into the first gate proper. It's not just a doorway, it's an event. The lintel above is carved with a winged sun disk, its feathers fanning outward as if it's mid-flight. Along the jambs, rows of hieroglyphs march in perfect alignment, spelling out prayers, royal titles, and, probably, the ancient equivalent of no solicitors. Beyond the threshold, you emerge into a small antechamber. The air here is warmer, heavier, laced with the scent of oil lamps and something sharp as cedar wood, maybe burning in a brazier. The flickering light makes the painted walls seem alive. Gods tilt their heads toward you. Jackal-headed Anubis watches with steady, unreadable eyes, and columns of glyphs seem to quiver as though whispering to each other about your presence. A robed figure waits in the center of the space. He's younger than you expect, his head shaved, his face smooth. His linen robes are spotless, falling in crisp folds. In one hand, he holds a staff topped with a miniature papyrus bloom. You have come to offer, he asks, not accusingly, but as if it's the only reasonable reason to be here. You nod, and he gestures toward a small side alcove. Inside, a low stone table holds a basket of bread, a jug of beer, and slightly amusingly, a cluster of onions. Egyptians loved their onions. They were thought to symbolize eternity because of their layered structure. Soldiers were even sometimes paid in them. Imagine negotiating your paycheck in vegetables, though, with prices these days. Maybe that's not so far-fetched. You place a small token from your pouch on the table. Yours isn't extravagant, just a carved faience bead shaped like a lotus. The young priest inclines his head slightly. The gods see. Whether that's comforting or vaguely unsettling is up to you. Moving onward, you step into a larger passageway. The ceiling here climbs higher, and you can feel a breeze pulling faintly toward the courtyard beyond. Ahead, the rhythmic chanting grows louder, and with it, the beat of drums soft, but insistent, like the temple's own pulse. On either side, recessed Nietzsche's house statues, falcon-headed Horus clutching a staff, ibis-headed Thoth holding a scribe's palette, lion-headed Sekhmet poised mid-stride. The artistry is so fine you half expect their eyes to blink. And honestly, with the way the torchlight dances, it almost looks like they do. The path narrows again before one last pair of guards. These ones are older, their faces deeply lined, their eyes sharp. They don't bother to ask for your token. They've already sized you up and, apparently, decided you pass muster. One gives a faint nod, and the other taps the butt of his spear twice against the ground, a signal, perhaps, or just an old habit. Then, finally, you step out into the open. The first courtyard stretches wide before you, lit by dozens of oil lamps and torches. The sudden openness after so much stone feels like a breath of air after being underwater. But even now, you feel the weight of the walls, the sense that each step deeper is a step further from the ordinary world. Somewhere, a gong sounds, low, resonant, and final. The first test, it seems, is over. But the night and the temple's secrets are only just beginning. The courtyard yawns open like a sunlit lake, though tonight the moon and torches do the shining. High walls enclose the space, their surfaces glowing amber where flames lick them with light, leaving the upper reaches to fade into black. You pause a moment, letting your eyes sweep across the vast expanse, because this is where the temple stops being merely impressive and starts feeling alive. Straight ahead, a broad path runs down the center, its flagstones wide enough for a chariot. On either side, smaller paths branch toward colonnades lined with painted columns, their capitals carved into lotus blossoms just about to unfurl. The air here is warm, scented with burning myrrh and something rich of freshly baked bread, maybe from an offering set out earlier. And underneath it all is the faint mineral temps of stone that has been absorbing sunlight for centuries. You're not alone. Villagers shuffle in from the far gates, some holding baskets draped in linen to hide the contents from dust or prying eyes. Nobles arrive more slowly, their servants carrying heavy jars of wine or polished chests of jewelry for the gods. Each group keeps a respectful distance from the others, like guests at a wedding who aren't entirely sure if they're on speaking terms at the center of it all. The priests form a slow-moving circle. They're chanting to Ra, the sun god. Though this late at night, it feels more like a lullaby for a sleeping king. The words roll like the river-soft consonants and long drawn-out vowels till they merge into a single continuous hum. Every few beats, a priest shakes a sistrum, its metal discs jingling like the whisper of coins in a pouch. Historians still argue whether the sistrum's sound was meant to please the gods, ward off evil spirits, or simply keep everyone awake during long ceremonies. The paving stones beneath your sandals still hold a memory of the day's heat. Here and there, faint chalk lines mark positions guides for the processions that pass through during daylight festivals. You imagine priests, acolytes, musicians, and dancers moving in carefully rehearsed order, turning the courtyard into a living painting. A group of children dance between two columns, giggling before their mother pulls them back. One boy clutches a small clay figurine of a falcon, holding it out like it might take flight. You almost tell him to be careful with it, then remember it's not your place. Besides, the way he's holding it, maybe he knows something you don't. Along the left-hand colonnade, a line of people kneels before a low altar. The surface is piled high with bread, fruit, onions, and a few fat geese, plucked but otherwise whole. A priest in a leopard skin sash moves among them, murmuring blessings, and sprinkling each gift with a pinch of natron salt. That leopard skin catches your eye. Egyptian priests wore them during certain rites to invoke the power of the wild, the untamed, the in-between. There's even a theory, one of those fringe boot-fun ones, that the spots were thought to represent the stars scattered across the night sky. The right-hand side is quieter, occupied by men and women in finer linen, their jewelry catching the torchlight in deliberate flashes. These are the noble families, the wealthy patrons who keep the temple, flush with gold and grain. A tall man with coal-lined eyes leans on an ebony staff, watching the ceremony with an expression that might be reverence or boredom. You drift closer to the priests in the center, drawn by the rhythm. The chanting builds, and you notice how the circle subtly tightens, the way dancers do just before the music changes. Then, without warning, the lead priest raises both hands, and the courtyard falls into a hush so deep you can hear the faint hiss of a torch dot from the far side. A pair of acolytes step forward, carrying a small brazier between them. Inside, resin crackles and smokes, the plume curling upward in slow spirals. The scent hits you a moment later, frankincense, sharp and bright, a smell that seems to sharpen the edges of the world. The priest speaks not to you, not to anyone here, but to the air above. Ra, great hawk, eye of the sky, accept the breath of this night. His voice echoes against the walls, the words wrapping around you like a cloak. And you wonder, as you watch the smoke drift upward, whether the gods ever leaned down to breathe it in. You glance back toward the gate where you entered, and for a moment you think you see your silent boatman standing in the shadows. But when you blink, he's gone. Just another trick of torchlight, you tell yourself, though you take a small step closer to the center anyway. The circle of priests begins to move again, slow as the turning of a wheel. This courtyard isn't a place to linger forever. The path ahead leads deeper, toward more guarded spaces, where the air grows thicker with incense and secrecy. You can feel it already. Each step further will carry you deeper into the temple's beating heart. And you, of course, aren't turning back. You follow the slow current of bodies toward the far end of the courtyard, where a long table has been set beneath a colonnade. The air here hums with conversations, soft but constant, like the low murmur of a tide pulling pebbles back into the sea. This is where the offerings pile up, each one laid carefully under the watchful eyes of temple attendants. The table is a feast without guests. Loaves of barley bread sit in neat stacks, their rounded tops brushed with a golden sheen. Jugs of beer, thick, cloudy, and smelling faintly of dates, rest beside them. You see clusters of onions, bowls of figs, pomegranates split open to reveal their jeweled seeds, and a few rare luxuries, honey sealed in clay pots, slabs of incense resin still wrapped in palm leaves, even a small jar of imported cinnamon. People step forward one at a time, as if approaching an invisible line they dare not cross until called. Each offering is taken by an attendant, examined briefly, then placed on the table in a spot that seems, though no one says it, ranked by value. It's a quiet choreography of faith and status. A woman in a rough-spun linen dress steps up with a small basket. She bows her head as an attendant takes it. Inside is nothing but a few crusts of bread and a handful of dried lentils. The attendant doesn't pause, doesn't judge, just sets them down at the far end of the table and murmurs a blessing. You notice the woman straighten a little as she walks away, as though the blessing weighed more than the offering. Next comes a merchant in a white robe edged with blue stitching. His gifter, fat goose, plucked and oiled, earns a subtle nod from the attendant before being placed in the center. And here's the thing, that center space, that's prime real estate. Even in a sacred context, humans can't resist the pecking order. A young boy slips forward with a small clay jar, clutching it so tightly you wonder if it'll crack. The attendant opens it and inhales. A smile flickers. Myrrh oil, costly, fragrant, and likely the best thing the boy's family owns. It's set carefully near the incense, and for a moment the boy glows brighter than the torches. You've read that in some temples. The food offerings were later eaten by the priests, distributed to the poor, or even sold in markets, sometimes all three, depending on the day. Historians still argue whether the gods were thought to consume only the spiritual essence of the offerings, leaving the physical goods free for mortal use. Personally, it seems like a pretty convenient arrangement if you're in charge of the pantry. One of the attendants approaches you. He's older, with creases around his eyes that might come from smiling or squinting against too much sun. "Your gift?" he asks. You reach into your pouch and pull out a small bundle wrapped in linen. Inside is a modest piece of lapis lazuli, its surface polished to a soft gleam. It's not much compared to the goose or the myrrh oil, but the attendant turns it over in his palm, as if weighing its worth beyond its size. Without a word, he places it near the middle of the table. From somewhere deeper in the temple, a low horn sounds. The attendants begin gathering the choicest offerings into reed baskets, their movements quick and practiced. The rest are left on the table, perhaps for later blessing, perhaps for later redistribution. You suspect the geese aren't going to sit out here for long in the Egyptian sun, even under divine protection. As the baskets are carried away, you catch the faint aroma of roasted grain drifting from somewhere out of sight. It blends with the sweetness of figs and the sharp bite of onions, until the whole courtyard smells like the world's most ancient buffet. A wiry priest with a shaved head passes by carrying a small clay jar. You glance inside as he passes it, filled with a paste the color of wet sand. You've heard of this. An odd mixture of dates, honey, and powdered limestone, sometimes offered to the gods, sometimes used as a kind of ritual adhesive for attaching amulets to statues. And yes, there's a fringe theory that it doubled as an early chewing gum. Imagine walking out of the temple with divine breath. The flow of people toward the table slows, and a subtle shift in the crowd's movement pulls you toward the courtyard's far edge. The air here feels different, cooler, heavier, and touched with a faint metallic tense. Ahead, two towering wooden doors stand slightly ajar, their surfaces studded with bronze knobs polished by countless hands. Beyond them lies the next threshold. You can hear the faint, rhythmic creak of something being carried, timbers swaying under weight, ropes stretching, sandals scuffing against stone. Somewhere inside, a procession is forming, and from the way the attendants glance toward it with a mix of anticipation and restraint, you know it's not the sort of thing just anyone gets to see. You take a slow breath. Your offering has been made. The gods, if they're watching, have been acknowledged. Now it's time to follow the sound, deeper into the temple's labyrinth of shadow and gold. The sound draws you in a low, steady rhythm of footfalls and rope creaks, as if the temple itself is breathing. The great wooden doors ahead open wider, and a spill of warm light cuts across the flagstones. The smell changes too. The smoky sweetness of incense deepens, layered with the faint tang of oiled wood and gold leaf that's been warmed by torch fire. You slip through with the others, into a long hall where the ceiling soars above you in darkness. At the far end, the glow of torches frames a small group of priests. They stand in two lines, their linen robes crisp and pale, their shaved heads gleaming. Between them rests the focus of every gaze in the room, the sacred Barque. It's not a full-size boat, more like an elaborate shrine set atop a gilded wooden hull, its sides inlaid with precious stones. Gold falcon heads adorn the prow and stern, their eyes inlaid with carnelian so they seem to burn in the torchlight. Draped over the middle is a linen veil, heavy with embroidery, hiding whatever lies within. You know it's the image of the god, maybe a statue, maybe something stranger, but no uninitiated eyes are allowed to see it. The bark rests on two long carrying poles, each padded with leather. 4 priests on each side grip the poles, their bodies tense, waiting for the signal. A 5th, taller priest steps forward and touches the prow with a short bronze rod. At that signal, the carriers heave in unison, and the bark rises into the air. The room tilts slightly as the procession begins. You fall in behind a cluster of onlookers who seem to know the unspoken rules. Keep your head slightly bowed, don't step too close, and for the love of Ra, don't trip on the flagstones. This last point seems particularly important when you notice how uneven the floor is. Some blocks have shifted just enough over centuries to turn a careless step into a dramatic tumble. As the priests move, 2 younger acolytes walk beside the bark, swinging censers that trail ribbons of scented smoke. The smell is thick and resinous, almost cloying, but with an edge of something sharp, possibly juniper or cedar. Historians still argue whether specific incense blends were chosen for their symbolic meaning, their ability to mask the less divine smells of the crowd, or just because they smelled expensive. The chanting starts low, a hum at first, then builds. The words are in the old tongue, syllables you can't quite catch, but the cadence is hypnotic. It's the sort of sound that makes you want to walk in step, even if you don't know the steps. At intervals, the leader lets out a sharp, almost bird-like cry, echoed by the carriers as they shift their grip. You pass under another towering gateway, this one flanked by colossal statues of the pharaoh. Their faces are identical, serene, eternal, and slightly smug, like they knew exactly how long their likeness would last. In the flickering light, the gold on the bark flashes, momentarily blinding you. Somewhere above, in the darkness, near the roof, a pigeon coos. You remember those small square holes you saw earlier on the pylons and wonder if this one's an uninvited guest or a very, very ancient employee. The sound makes a few onlookers smile quietly to themselves, the sacred moment briefly shared with a bird. The procession turns into a smaller side hall. The walls here are covered in painted scenes. The god, tall and radiant, sailing across the sky in his bark, battling serpents of chaos with a spear of light. The priests mirror that journey in miniature, their careful steps tracing an invisible river through the stone corridors. At one point, you catch sight of a niche in the wall, a small, almost hidden shelf bearing a shallow bowl filled with milk. A fringe belief you once heard comes to mind. Some said the gods had animal forms that still roamed unseen, and the milk was left to feed them during festivals. You don't know if that's true, but the milk looks fresh. The chanting grows louder, reverberating off the narrow walls until it feels like the sound is coming from everywhere at once. The air is hotter here, heavy with incense, and the flicker of torches throws shifting patterns across the gold leaf of the bark. Finally, the procession halts before a set of immense bronze doors. The leader raises both hands, and the chanting cuts off mid-syllable. In the sudden silence, you can hear the faint crackle of torch flames, the soft hiss of burning resin, and the slow, deliberate breath of the carriers. The doors swing inward without a sound. Beyond lies a vast, shadowed space where the light seems reluctant to enter. The bark tilts slightly as the carriers step forward, disappearing into the gloom. The crowd doesn't follow. This is as far as most are allowed to go. The god will rest here, hidden from mortal sight, until the next stage of the festival. You linger a moment, catching the last glint of gold as it vanishes into darkness. Somewhere deep inside, the faint bird-like cry of the leader echoes once more, and then it's gone, swallowed by the temple's heart. You stay pressed against the cool wall, feeling the hum of expectation in the crowd. The bronze doors shut with a deep, almost musical tone, like a gong that's been struck once and left to fade into eternity. The light in this antechamber dims without the glow from within, and for a few moments you can make out only the flicker of torchlight against the painted walls. The priests outside begin their work. 2 acolytes step forward with long-handled bronze basins filled with water drawn from the Nile that morning. You watch as they set the basins on low stone stands, their movements precise and almost rehearsed, as if even the splash of water needs divine approval. The scent of the river rises cool, faintly muddy, with a whisper of lotus flowers. A senior priest appears, holding what looks like a bundle of stiff reeds bound with red cord. He dips the tips into the water and begins to flick droplets in broad, sweeping arcs across the gathered crowd. The drops are cold when they hit your skin, and the man beside you gives a slight shiver, muttering something about luck. Historians still argue whether this sprinkling was meant to purify or simply to symbolically share the god's blessing. Either way, you're pretty sure your hair is now about 3% holier. From the far side of the hall, musicians strike up a slow rhythm-deep drums that sound more like heartbeats than instruments, and the metallic shimmer of sistrums, those curious rattles made from bronze and faience. The combined sound is both grounding and hypnotic, the kind of beat that makes you sway before you realize you're doing it. A second group of priests emerges from behind a side curtain. They carry baskets woven from palm fronds, each lined with linen. Inside, you glimpse bread shaped like tiny birds, small bowls of honey, and what appears to be roasted goose meat. The smell is rich and savory, cutting through the layers of incense like a warm knife through butter. One of the baskets is set down before a small side shrine, where a low table is carved with lotus petals. The food is carefully arranged, each piece aligned as if it's part of some cosmic geometry. You remember reading that Egyptians believed the gods consumed only the essence of food, leaving the physical meal behind to be shared later among priests, which is, you think, a polite way of saying We'll have leftovers for dinner. Off to your left, you notice an old man dressed in a plain linen kilt, leaning heavily on a staff carved with ibis motifs. He's telling a boy, probably his grandson, that the goose offering is a gift for Armon himself. The boy's eyes are wide, and he asks whether Armon actually eats it. The old man chuckles and says, "Only in ways you can't see." You suspect that's the kind of answer that's been given to curious kids for 3,000 years. The drums shift tempo, quickening slightly, and a small group of dancers enters. They wear white linen skirts and strings of beads that jingle softly with each movement. Their feet slap against the stone floor in a steady rhythm, bare soles finding a beat that matches the deep thump of the drums. The air stirs with each turn and leap, the dancers' shadows spinning wildly across the painted gods on the wall, as if those ancient figures are joining in. And then, without any announcement, the bronze doors open again. A thick wave of incense rolls out, and behind it, the sacred bark reappears, carried with the same solemn care as before. This time, the veil is gone, and you catch your first glimpse of what rests inside, a small, gleaming statue of the god, its face serene, its body adorned with tiny inlays of lapis and turquoise. The eyes are wide and black, catching the torchlight in a way that makes them seem almost alive. The statue is set upon a low pedestal in the center of the hall. The crowd leans forwards, some people bow their heads, others whisper prayers. Few stretch out their hands toward the air between themselves and the god, as if touching invisible threads. From the front of the room, the high priest begins to chant. The words flow in slow, deliberate waves, each phrase ending with a rising note that seems to suspend in the air before falling back into the next. You don't understand the language, but you feel the weight of it like it's pressing softly on your chest, urging you to breathe in time with the prayer. Near your elbow, a woman murmurs to herself, describing what's happening for a child who can't quite see over the crowd. She explains that the god is being asked to bless the people for the coming season to keep the floods gentle, the crops plentiful, and the enemies far away. Her voice is hushed but steady, as if she's reciting something she said at every festival since she was the child's age. A small, curious moment catches your attention. One of the junior priests leans down and whispers something to another, then discreetly adjusts the god's necklace so the amulet lies perfectly centered. You can't help thinking it's a reminder that even in the holiest moments, someone's job is still to make sure the jewelry looks right. When the chanting stops, the high priest raises both hands and calls out a single word. The crowd answers in unison, their voices bouncing off the stone walls like the echo of 1,000 years. The drums end on a final, resonant thud. The statue is veiled once more. The bark is lifted and carried away through the side passage, its gold flashing one last time before disappearing into shadow. The crowd slowly begins to break apart, drifting toward the outer courtyards. You follow, feeling the cool night air reach in to meet you, the faint taste of incense still clinging to your tongue, and somewhere in the back of your mind, you realize you're already eager for whatever comes next. The night air is cooler now, brushing over your skin like a faint ripple of the Nile itself. You drift with the crowd into the temple's outer courtyard, a wide open space ringed by tall papyrus-shaped columns, whose tops seem to cup the starlight. The torches here are fewer, and the darkness beyond the columns feels thick, like it could swallow whole whatever wanders too far. Somewhere overhead, a desert owl calls, its voice long and low, as though it's also keeping watch over the ceremony, in the center of the courtyard. A group of priests is gathering around a tall, conical structure covered in fine white linen. It stands on a square stone base, and even from where you are, you can see faint symbols traced in ochre spiraling up the fabric. The structure is the ceremonial offering stand, at least. That's what the man in front of you murmurs to his companion. Built only for this festival, he adds. Historians still argue whether this object was simply decorative or whether it held deeper, cosmic significance. Judging by the amount of linen and fuss, you suspect the priests are betting on cosmic dot. Two boys in spotless kilts approach carrying baskets. Inside are more offerings. Pomegranates glowing like small embers in the torchlight, dates that shine with sticky sweetness, and clay jugs likely filled with beer or sweet wine. You catch a whiff of the wine's sharp tannins as they pass, and it mixes oddly with the incense still hanging in your hair from earlier. The high priest reappears, his tall headdress catching the firelight, and the crowd parts without being told. He walks toward the conical structure, carrying a small gilded box no bigger than a bread loaf. You lean to one side, trying to get a better look, and just for a moment you see the gleam of something inside. A sliver of blue stone, perhaps lapis, lazuli, cut into a shape that could be a feather or a flame. The musicians begin again, but this time the melody is lighter, almost playful, with flutes joining the deeper drums. The sound drifts upward toward the open sky, and you realize this is less solemn worship and more, let's call it divine schmoozing, a chance for humans and gods to mingle without all the heavy atmosphere of the inner sanctum. An elderly woman beside you starts speaking, not to you exactly, but in that way older people sometimes narrate aloud for anyone who might be listening. This is when they make the gift of renewal, she says, nodding toward the priests. They feed the god's image so that life will feed us in return. She chuckles, and afterward the leftovers go home with the kitchen staff. Nothing goes to waste in Egypt, except maybe those tiny fish from the delta. No one likes those. You file that away as both a quirky tidbit and a reminder that history is basically the original recycling movement. The high priest opens the gilded box and carefully places its contents, now clearly the lapis featherette, the top of the conical stand. One of the younger priests sprinkles something around its base. The air fills with a sweet, woody scent, if you had to guess. The smoke curls upward, catching the starlight in soft silver ribbons. People begin to approach the stand in small groups, each placing something at its base: a carved amulet, a handful of grain, a folded piece of linen. Some kneel for a moment. Before stepping away, others press their foreheads briefly to the stone. You notice that a few leave nothing physical at all. They just pause, look up toward the top, and close their eyes. Silent offerings, you think. A narrow procession forms. At the courtyard's far end, here come the dancers again, this time in looser formation, laughing quietly between steps. They carry palm branches that swish softly as they walk, and in the flickering light, the fronds cast moving shadows like waves rippling over stone. Behind them, a group of singers follows, their voices weaving together in a melody that feels as much like storytelling as music. Halfway through the song, you feel a gentle tap on your shoulder. A young temple worker gestures for you to step forward. You glance around, surely there's been a mistake, but he simply nods and points toward the stand. Apparently, you've been invited into the offering line. Your turn comes quickly. The priests watch with the polite detachment of people who've seen 1,000 strangers step up before you. You didn't bring a pomegranate, a jug of beer, or even a tiny fish, lucky for everyone. So you do the only thing that feels right. You place your hand on the stone base, close your eyes, and breathe in the mingled scents of myrrh, wine, and night air. You think about the river, the people who live by it, the vast sweep of sand beyond, and just maybe the God listening from somewhere in that dark sky. When you step back, the young worker gives you a quick smile before ushering the next person forward. You return to the edge of the crowd, where the music continues, the smoke drifts upward, and the night seems to hum softly with the feeling that you've just become a thread in a very, very old tapestry. As the line dwindles, the priests begin to gather up the offerings, moving them into a side chamber. The conical stand remains, its linen covering now faintly marked by the shadows of the objects once placed there. You have the odd thought that, come morning, the courtyard will look utterly ordinary, as if the night's magic has been folded away like a precious garment. But for now, it's still enlivened. You can't help but wonder what the next part of the ritual will reveal. The torches are dimming now, but the air hums with that strange aftertaste of ceremony like. The party isn't over, just changing costumes. You follow the subtle drift of the crowd toward a narrower passageway flanked by carved pillars. These pillars are alive with stories, battles, boat journeys, gods shaking hands with kings. The figures seem to dance when the torchlight flickers across them, and for a second you could swear one of the falcon-headed deities just winked at you. This passage leads into a smaller courtyard, more intimate, with the ceiling open to a slice of midnight. The moon hovers there, a polished shard of silver, its light pooling on a raised platform at the center. This is the temple's chamber of offerings, though calling it a chamber feels like calling the Nile a puddle. In the middle sits a squat stone altar. It's not flashy, no gold leaf or gems, just solid warm-colored limestone worn smooth from centuries of use. A priest you haven't seen before, bare-chested but draped in a heavily beaded collar, stands beside it. His voice, when he begins to speak, carries with surprising force through the open courtyard. He lists blessings like someone unrolling a papyrus: fertile fields, healthy cattle, safe births, peaceful floods. You notice that he sprinkles in some crowd pleasers, 2 swift trade caravans, no scorpion infestations, practical magic at its finest. Beside the altar is an array of small clay bowls, each filled with something different: salt, barley, crushed lotus petals, even a bright powder you can't quite identify. Historians still argue whether this was pure ochre or powdered carnelian. Each will be poured or scattered as part of the next sequence of offerings. A side door opens, and here come the temple kitchen staff. Yes, kitchen staff. They carry trays piled with bread shaped like ducks, honey cakes, and roasted quail, their skins gleaming in the torchlight. You suddenly feel the awkward mix of awe and snack envy. It's strange to think these delicacies are for the gods, but later, well, the gods have a generous leftovers policy. A young boy in a crisp white kilt approaches the altar with a basket of figs. He places them on the stone, bows his head, and steps back. Then a line of others follows. Some bring baskets of onions. Ancient Egypt's onion obsession was real. Others small jugs of beer, and one man clearly aiming for extra point sofas, an elaborately painted ceramic fish. You think back to that old woman's comment about no one liking Delta fish and wonder if this is some kind of inside joke between mortals and the divine. The high priest returns, this time barefoot, begins arranging the offerings himself. The precision is mesmerizing. bowls are turned just so. Bread is angled toward the moonlight. The honey cakes are stacked like tiny golden pyramids. Every move is deliberate, as though the placement alone could coax blessings from the sky. You're still watching when the first sacrifice happens. No, not the bloody kind Egypt. Wasn't big on that in temple rituals by this period, but a symbolic one. A perfect loaf of bread is sliced in two and placed into the altar's central recess. The idea is to share with the gods, and for a moment you wonder if somewhere beyond the stars, a divine hand is reaching for its half. The music resumes, the brassy temple fanfare from earlier, but something softer. The flutes sound almost like whispers, the sistrum bells like raindrops. The smell of roasting quail mixes with the floral temps of lotus petals, and you feel your stomach stage a small protest that it isn't invited to dinner. Then comes a quieter moment. The high priest takes a cup from the altar, filled with what looks like red wine, and holds it up to the moon. Everyone falls silent. You can almost hear the desert breathing beyond the temple walls. In a voice low but firm, he dedicates the drink to all that has been and all that will be, then tips it slowly onto the stone floor. The liquid darkens the limestone for a moment before sinking in, leaving behind nothing but the faint scent of grapes. An elderly priestess approaches next. Her steps measured, her hair silver and cropped short. She carries a shallow dish of tiny blue beads faience. Perhaps sand scatters them round the altar's base. The beads catch the moonlight like drops of frozen water, and you think you've never seen anything so quietly beautiful. The crowd remains hushed, even as the last offering is placed. For a long moment, the priests simply stand around the altar, faces turned upward. You find yourself doing the same, feeling the cool moonlight on your skin, as if it's a blessing you didn't know you needed. Then dash just as suddenly as it began. Over, the priests begin to gather the offerings, carrying them into the shadows of the side rooms. The altar remains bare except for the faience beads, which seem to glow even brighter now that they're alone. People begin drifting back toward the main courtyard, their murmurs growing louder as the sense of sacredness loosens its grip as you turn to follow. You notice a detail you somehow missed before. Carved into the altar's side is the faint outline of a lotus flower, its petals curling upward. It's half worn away by centuries of touch, yet still graceful. You run your fingers lightly over the grooves before stepping away, wondering if anyone in the next 1,000 years will do the same. The main courtyard feels different, now less a stage for grand spectacle, more like a lounge after the show, where people slip into smaller conversations. But you're not here for small talk. The faint sound of drumming from somewhere deeper in the temple draws you onward. Like a thread you can't help but follow. You pass under a lintel carved with 2 winged sun discs, their feathers curling down toward you as if to usher you in. The air here is thicker, richer, with the scent of burning kefi incense, that blend of honey, wine, raisins, cinnamon, and because this is ancient Egypt, a whisper of ground myrrh. Kefi isn't just air freshener, it's said to help souls navigate the dream world, which, in your current sleep-deprived state, sounds both inviting and slightly risky. The corridor opens into a rectangular hall lit not by fire, but by dozens of polished copper mirrors reflecting torchlight from the outer chamber. The result is a gentle, honey-gold glow that makes everyone look faintly divine. A low dais at the far end holds 3 gilded chairs, empty for now. But you have the distinct impression they're waiting for someone important. At the center of the room is a large, waist-high table covered in fine linen. Spread across it are scrolls, small alabaster jars, reed pens, and most strikingly a model of the Nile Delta carved entirely from wood. Tiny green inlays mark fertile fields, while strips of blue faience beadwork glitter where the river's channels would be. Around the model stand several priests and scribes, deep in conversation. You sidle closer, pretending you totally belong here. They're discussing what sounds like temple resource distribution, how much grain to send to a nearby village, whether the temple should sponsor repairs to a certain irrigation canal, and more animatedly whether the tax on imported cedar should be adjusted. It's not glamorous, but it's a reminder. Temples aren't just spiritual hubs. They're ancient administrative powerhouses. Historians still argue whether this secular role diluted their religious purpose or simply made them more essential. Scribe with sharp eyes and a slightly bent reed pen turns to the model and moves one of the tiny faience river channels a few millimeters. The others lean in, murmuring approval. You realize this is more than a map. It's a visual prayer and a policy tool rolled into one. The shifting of a miniature river here could mean actual workers sent to dredge the real one tomorrow in the far corner. Another group works over. Tablets coated in blackened wax. These are tallying records, temple offerings, storehouse inventory, maybe even workforce rosters. One man dips his stylus into the wax with the resigned precision of someone who has been counting onions all day. Ancient Egypt, the only place where an onion could be both sacred and tedious. The drums you heard earlier are louder now, coming from a small side room through an open archway. You step inside and find a group of younger priests seated cross-legged, practicing a rhythmic pattern on hand drums. Their teacher, a tall man with arms like carved cedar poles, claps his hands to set the beat. The students follow, their eyes locked on him, trying to keep up. It's hypnotic, steady, intricate, a little like the heartbeat of the temple itself. You notice the teacher occasionally changes the rhythm abruptly, forcing his pupils to adjust. Mid-stroke, you get the sense this isn't just music training, it's a lesson in adaptability. The kind you'd need if you're ever called to lead a ceremony, when a high-ranking priest suddenly faints from too much midday sun. Back in the main hall, the gilded chairs are no longer empty. 3 senior officials have arrived, robes crisp, collars gleaming with rows of beads. The central figure tall, stern, with the kind of posture that says, "I make decisions that affect thousands of people," is clearly the temple's chief administrator. He listens as a scribe presents the day's resource report, occasionally nodding, occasionally frowning in that way that makes everyone else in the room shift uncomfortably. When the meeting concludes, the chief administrator rises and walks toward the dais steps. He pauses, glances toward the wooden Nile model, and without a word repositions a tiny faience, fertile field closer to the delta's tip. The room goes completely silent for 3 beats. Then the scribes start furiously writing. You realize you've just witnessed the ancient equivalent of a policy decree. No speeches, no drama, just a quiet move on a miniature map that will ripple across actual lives. The mirrors along the walls catch the administrator's reflection as he leaves, turning his retreat into a slow fade of gold and shadow. You take one last look at the wooden Nile, now subtly altered, and wonder how many such changes have been made over centuries, each one shaping the land, the people, the very story of Egypt. The drumming in the side room resumes, lighter now, almost playful, as if the temple itself has exhaled after a moment of gravity. You turn toward the next corridor, ready to see what other rooms hide behind these carved stone walls. You move into a narrower passage, the kind that feels as though the temple wants to test your loyalty before revealing anything more. The air is cooler here, almost damp, carrying the faint mineral temps of stone that hasn't seen sunlight in centuries. Your sandals scuff against a smooth floor, and the sound seems too loud, bouncing off the walls like you're walking through a giant's flute. Ahead, the corridor swells into a rounded chamber, no mirrors, no grand carvings, a space heavy with scent. The smell is unmistakable, oil, rich and herbal, warmed by the bodies working here. At first you think you've wandered into a storeroom, but then you see them priests in simple linen kilts, sleeves rolled, standing over bronze basins the size of bathtubs. They're mixing and straining liquids, pouring them into smaller alabaster jars. Some oils are the golden hue of late afternoon sunlight. Others are darker, the color of polished walnut. Every so often, a priest crushes fresh blossoms, blue lotus, marigold, sweet rush between two flat stones, releasing a perfume so intense, you almost feel dizzy. A low table near the wall holds little clay tags, each etched with symbols marking which oil is for which god, which ceremony, which part of the body. You overhear a quiet debate about a recent shipment of frankincense from Punt. Apparently, it arrived early this year, throwing off the preparation schedule. Historians still argue whether the temple's reliance on imported resins was about pure necessity or simply prestige, because let's be honest, half of sacred ritual is also sacred brand management. You linger by a set of copper bowls, holding powders in colors you didn't expect, deep indigo, chalk white, and a strange green that reminds you of summer pond water. A younger priest explains their pigments for painting divine statues and ceremonial objects. He grins and adds, almost conspiratorially, that the green pigment comes from ground malachite, good for the eyes. You suspect good for the eyes might also mean makes your eyelids sparkle in torchlight. But you nod solemnly like you're taking notes. On the far side of the room, another group is melting beeswax over low flames, stirring it into a thick, glossy liquid. They pour it carefully into molds shaped like small discs. You recognize them from temple offerings, wax amulets meant to be burned as symbolic acts. One mold catches your eye, a tiny bound crocodile. The priest explains it's used in rituals for warding off Sobek's wrath during flooding season. You're not sure whether to be impressed or worried that this counts as warding off and not provoking. Along one wall stands a tall, wooden cabinet, its doors inlaid with thin strips of ivory. Inside are shelves lined with scrolls, each wrapped in linen to protect it from dust. You catch glimpses of painted symbols on the edges, formulas, chants, perhaps recipes for these very oils and pigments. The care with which they're stored tells you that these mixtures are more than pleasant scents, they're codified knowledge, guarded as tightly as any royal decree. A sudden movement draws your attention. One of the older priests is dipping his fingers into a bowl of shimmering blue liquid. He paints a line across his own eyelids, then closes his eyes and begins a soft chant. The blue, probably crushed lapis lazuli mixed with oil catches the light and gleams like the night sky. The room falls quiet as his voice deepens, the chant shifting into a slow, resonant hum that seems to vibrate in your bones. When he opens his eyes again, the moment breaks and the others return to their work. But you can't shake the feeling that you just witnessed a small rehearsal of something far greater. An echo of the moment when these oils and pigments will transform the ordinary into the divine. Near the door, two apprentices struggle to carry a massive jar between them, their arms trembling. The jar is sealed with a clay stopper marked by the symbol of Hathor, goddess of music and joy. The apprentices whisper that it contains an oil so potent it can open the heart of the gods. You decide not to ask what that means. You've learned by now that in temples, vague poetic claims are just as binding as detailed instructions. You step back into the corridor, the cool air rushing over you like you've emerged from a fragrant underwater cave. Your skin still carries traces of the room's scents: floral, resinous, a faint sharpness of crushed leaves. Somewhere deep in the temple, those drums you heard earlier keep pulsing, steady and insistent, as though reminding you that the temple's heart is still beating, and you're only beginning to understand its rhythm. The passage ahead seems darker now, the torchlight from the oil room receding behind you. You take a deep breath, your last lungful of lotus and frankincense, for the moment, and walk toward the next unseen chamber, wondering what sensory ambush waits beyond the shadows. The darkness swallows you for a moment, forcing your eyes to work harder. Then, as if on cue, a faint amber glow appears ahead. Torches, mounted at an angle so their light spills downwards, washing the floor in gold while leaving the upper walls. In shadow, it feels intentional, like the temple wants you to focus on your steps rather than your surroundings. When you finally do look up, the shadows resolve into the carved forms of towering figures, deities etched into the limestone, each standing taller than two men. Their eyes seem to follow you as you move along the corridor, and while you know it's a trick of perspective, it's still unnerving. One goddess holds a sistrum, a sacred rattle, while another grips a wascepter, the staff of power. You can almost hear the soft, metallic jingle that might accompany a festival procession. The air here carries a different scent, not floral, not resinous, but something sharper, a metallic tang you can't quite name. You realize it's the smell of blood, faint but undeniable. Your pulse quickens. The torches lead you to a wide threshold, guarded not by statues but by two living men, priests draped in immaculate white, their shaved heads gleaming in the light. They cross their staves in front of you. One asks in a low voice if you're purified. It's less a question and more a reminder. One enters this space without the proper rites. You're ushered inside, and the scene opens before you like a stage play mid-performance. This is the offering court, a place where sacrifices, animal and symbolic, are made to feed the gods. You had expected chaos or noise, but the atmosphere is strangely calm, as though every movement here has been rehearsed 1,000 times. At the center, a low stone altar holds a carved depression, stained dark from years of libations. Around it, acolytes in knee-length kilts move in a slow, deliberate circle, each carrying a basket, figs, pomegranates, bread loaves shaped like little suns. Occasionally, one stops to place an offering on the altar, murmuring a phrase that you can't quite catch. In one corner, a smaller group tends to live animals, goats, ducks, and a sleek white calf whose hide almost glows in the torchlight. Historians still argue whether the temple truly required blood sacrifice on a regular basis, or if it was reserved for extraordinary occasions. Some evidence suggests the animals were symbolically offered and then used for community feasts. Still, the faint smell of blood here suggests not everything is symbolic. You notice a bronze brazier near the far wall, its coals glowing orange. A priest kneels beside it, sprinkling what looks like grain mixed with dried herbs into the fire. The scent blooms instantly earthy, sweet, and faintly bitter. It mixes with the metallic temps until your senses can't quite separate the two. Then you spot the oddest thing so far. A platter of onions, neatly arranged in concentric rings. An older priest notices your stare and leans close, whispering, "Offerings to ward off sickness. The gods like the smell." You try not to laugh, because apparently divine beings share the taste preferences of someone who just discovered cooking school. Near the altar, a man steps forward holding a small clay jar. He tips it gently, pouring a thin stream of beer onto the stone. The liquid splashes and runs into the carved depression before trickling down a narrow channel. You realize the altar is engineered to drain offerings away, a subtle piece of temple design that's as practical as it is symbolic. The rhythm of the scene builds slowly. The acolytes circle, the brazier flares, the animals shift and snort. You catch yourself swaying slightly, as though drawn into the ceremony's cadence. A fringe belief drifts through your mind. Some say the temple rituals were as much about hypnotizing the participants as pleasing the gods. Whether that's true or just a modern romantic theory, you can feel its pull. Suddenly, the circle stops. The head priest raises both hands, and the entire court falls silent. Even the animals seem to pause. He speaks a series of words, low but clear, each one carrying that measured tone you've come to recognize, half chant, half command. The other priests respond in unison, their voices layered and resonant. The sound fills the room like a physical presence pressing against your chest. Then, with one smooth motion, the head priest takes a shallow bronze blade from the altar. He approaches the white calf. There's no fear in the animal's eyes, only calm, as though it's been prepared for this moment its whole life. You look away just before the blade moves, catching instead the flicker of torchlight on the carved walls. When you glance back, the priests are already collecting the blood in a wide basin, murmuring blessings as they work. The offering has been made. Another priest steps forward to sprinkle oil into the brazier. The flames leap higher, and a column of scented smoke rises to the ceiling before curling toward a vent cut high in the wall. You remember the storage jars of precious oils from earlier, the connection between those careful preparations and this very moment. Nothing here happens in isolation. The temple is a living organism, each chamber feeding the next. You're led back toward the corridor, your sandals crunching softly on the grit underfoot. The metallic scent lingers in your nose, mixing with the sweetness of the smoke. Behind you, the ceremony continues, but you sense it will fade into something quieter, more private, once outsiders are gone. The corridor ahead feels darker than before, but this time it's not the absence of light, it's the weight of what you've just witnessed. The temple has shown you another piece of its heart, and it beats with both beauty and solemnity. The corridor bends sharply to the left, and you follow its curve like water tracing a channel. The torches thin out, replaced by faint slits high in the stone walls where daylight slips through, pale and dusty. This dim glow isn't enough to read by, but it's enough to make out the faint hieroglyphic friezes running shoulder high on either side. Here, the carvings are not about war or kings, they're about food. You see wheat being threshed, bread being kneaded, fish being laid out to dry in the sun. The scenes look almost ordinary, but each is framed with sacred symbols. The ankh for life, the jed for stability. It's like someone took a grocery list and turned it into scripture. You're reminded that the temple was not just a place for worship, it was an economic engine, a food bank, and a logistics hub for the entire region. Ahead, The space widens into a hall filled with long, low stone benches. This is no ceremonial chamber. It's a working one. The smell here is immediately different, warm, yeasty, and rich with a faint tense of fermentation. Your stomach reacts before your brain does. To your left, giant ceramic vats line the wall, each capped with a layer of woven reeds and sealed with mud. A priest with a broad grin and flour-dusted arms notices your curiosity and taps the side of one vat. It answers with a low, hollow thump. "Beer," he says, as though announcing the punchline of the world's oldest joke, Egyptian. Beer wasn't quite the golden lager of modern pubs. It was thick, sweet, and cloudy, almost a meal in itself. And here you see its production in full swing. Young workers carrying baskets of emmer wheat, older women mashing the grain into dough, and others breaking up yesterday's loaves to soak them in water. The scent of malt mixes with that warm yeastiness, creating something both comforting and a little funky. The hall buzzes with quiet industry, but the tempo is steady, not frantic. You spot another corner where oil presses squat like ancient machines. Two men feed sesame seeds into a shallow stone basin, turning a long wooden lever that crushes the seeds into a thick paste. This paste is then wrapped in linen and placed under a weighted press, the golden oil trickling into a bowl. That oil will become offerings, anointing fluid, and even fuel for lamps' liquid sunlight. Carefully stored in those giant amphorae you saw earlier, historians still argue whether temple breweries and oil presses served primarily the gods or the people. Some say these were divine-only products, others insist the surplus fed workers and pilgrims. The truth might be both, depending on the festival, the ruler, and the temple's wealth at the time. At the far end of the hall, you find something stranger, a rack of clay molds shaped like miniature loaves, each no bigger than your palm. A priest explains, therefore, ritual bread, tiny offerings that could be made in great quantities and placed at multiple shrines without exhausting the temple's stores. It's like ancient Egypt's version of sample sizes. You can't help noticing the rhythm of the work, the scraping of grain, the pounding of pestles, the hiss of oil into clay jars. Every motion seems to have been done this way for centuries, passed from hands long gone to the ones before you now. There's a quiet dignity in it, a sense that the gods are not only fed by ceremonies, but by this steady hum of human labor. Then you're led to a small side room, cooler and darker. Here, baskets of figs, dates, and honeycombs are stacked to the ceiling, the air heavy with their sweetness. A thin, wiry priest slices a fig open for you. Its center glistens like a sunset, caught in fruit. He smiles, but then his tone turns almost conspiratorial. The gods take the first taste. We share the rest. You realize that in a land where famine was never far from memory, storing and redistributing food was as sacred as any hymn. But your guide doesn't let you linger. He gestures toward a narrow stairwell climbing steeply upward. As you ascend, the air changes, again lighter now, tinged with a faint herbal sharpness. The steps open into a rooftop courtyard, where the sun hits you like a solid wall of heat. You squint against it and find rows of clay trays laid out under the sky. Herbs, mint, fenugreek, coriander dry slowly in the baking air. Their colors are muted, but their scent is a crisp, clean contrast to the heavier smells below. And there, at the far edge of the rooftop, a priest leans against the low wall, looking out over the city. Beyond the temple's perimeter, You see the patchwork of fields, the shimmer of irrigation canals, and the slow, patient movement of people carrying baskets and jars. The temple isn't a world apart, it's the heart of this one, pulsing food, drink, and oil outward like lifeblood. Your guide gives a dry chuckle. Some think we live only in shadow, he says, gesturing back toward the inner sanctuaries. But the sun feeds the gods, too. A breeze ruffles the drying herbs, carrying their scent past you as you turn to descend again. The rooftop light fades behind you, replaced once more by torchlit corridors and the deep, rhythmic breathing of the temple's endless work. You follow the sound before you see the room-soft chanting, the kind that threads itself through stone and lingers long after the voices fall silent. The air grows heavier, warmer, as though carrying the weight of 1,000 whispered petitions. Then the corridor opens into a chamber bathed in the flicker of dozens of oil lamps, each flame dancing like it has secrets to keep. This is the house of life, a place where words themselves are made sacred. The walls are lined with papyrus scrolls, rolled tight and stacked in niches like honeycombs. Scribes in white linen robes sit cross-legged on low stools, reed pens poised, grinding ink from soot and ochre. The smell here is remarkable: resin, papyrus fibers, and the metallic tang of ink. A young scribe glances up and gives you a half-smile before returning to his work. You watch his hand glide across the page, carving meaning into the fibers with such precision you'd think each letter might break if it leaned too far. The text he copies is not poetry or royal decrees, a hymn to a deity, one of hundreds, kept here, ready to be recited during daily offerings or grand festivals. In this temple, the gods are not fed by food alone. They are nourished by words. You notice a set of older men at the far table. Their work is slower, more deliberate. They're restoring damaged scrolls, carefully replacing frayed edges with fresh strips of papyrus and wrinking faded hieroglyphs. One priest, his bald head shining in the lamplight, pauses to squint at a particular passage, muttering under his breath. Historians still argue whether these temple libraries served as the first true archives of human history or were strictly religious repositories. Either way, the weight of knowledge here feels almost physically like the air is thicker simply because of what it contains. In the corner, a locked chest sits under the watchful gaze of a middle-aged priest with the calm patience of someone who has seen countless sunrises from the same spot. He unlocks it for you, revealing a few papyri, far older than the rest, fragile, brown, and almost translucent. They are copies of texts written centuries before your time here. Creation myths, spells for safe passage into the afterlife, records of eclipses and floods. One contains a set of curious star charts, its constellations sketched in a way that seems both familiar and strange, as if the night sky itself has changed since it was drawn. Not everything here is solemn. You overhear two apprentices arguing in whispers about whether a certain prayer works better if spoken at dawn or dusk. It's the kind of debate you might expect from modern coffee drinkers arguing over brewing methods, passionate but ultimately personal. One of them notices you listening and shrugs. The gods hear us whenever they please, he says, but some of us like to stack the odds. A soft cough draws your attention to another alcove, this one filled with small clay figurines and carved amulets. These are teaching aids, the scribe beside you explains, used to instruct younger priests in symbolism and ritual. He hands you a tiny faience amulet shaped like an eye. This is the eye of Horus, he says, his voice lowering. Protection, healing, power. The glaze is smooth and cool against your palm, and for a moment it's easy to believe it. Might carry more than just artistic value. Then comes a curious moment. A priest begins, chanting directly at one of the papyrus scrolls. It's not for you, not for the other priests. This recitation is for the scroll itself. The belief is that by speaking the words aloud, they keep the scroll alive, preventing it from losing its power through neglect. It's like the ancient Egyptian version of charging a battery, except the battery is made of words and faith. In another niche, you see small clay tablets, unusual in a culture that favored papyrus. Your guide notes, they're used for quick notes, training, or messages meant to last through floods or fire. One is carved with something that makes him chuckle, a rough sketch of a cat swatting at what appears to be a priest's headdress. Even here, humor has found a way to survive for thousands of years. As you make your way toward the far exit, you pass a narrow slit of a window. Through it, you glimpse the temple courtyard below, where farmers unload sacks of grain from donkeys. The contrast is striking below, the noise and labor of the body. Here, the stillness and discipline of the mind. You can almost hear the temple breathing in to rhythms at once. Your guide stops at the doorway, leaning lightly on his staff. Words, he says, outlive stone, but only if someone remembers to speak them. He gestures for you to follow, and you step back into the corridor, the fading chant still threading through your thoughts. Somewhere behind you, a pen scratches against papyrus, and you can't shake the sense that your own footsteps might one day be written down in one of those scrolls, whether as fact, legend, or something in between. The hallway ahead feels cooler, a relief after the close, warm air of the library. You follow a faint, steady hum, not the human kind, but the low vibration of something in motion, like wind threading through narrow spaces. The walls begin to curve here, subtly guiding you toward a chamber with a very different atmosphere. When you step inside, the light changes. Instead of golden lamplight or torch glow, this room is lit with filtered daylight, funneled in through carefully placed openings high in the walls. It creates long, thin beams that fall across a cluster of instruments, some small enough to fit in your hand, others stretching the length of a man's arm. You've arrived in the temple's observatory. The floor is inlaid with smooth, dark stone, polished enough to catch those thin beams of sunlight like mirrors. In the center, a priest in a leopard skin sash stands beside a tall wooden divisor, Merkit holding it to his eye as he aligns it with a point in the ceiling. He's measuring the stars' positions, though it's daylight now, he explains. That the device is just as important for calibrating during the day as it is for tracking the night sky. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians were primarily concerned with mapping celestial movements for agricultural planning or for religious ceremony, but either way, you can tell this man treats the work as sacred. Near him, another priest kneels beside a broad, flat surface painted with a star map. The constellations here look familiar, but not identical to the ones you'd recognize today. The Big Dipper, for example, is drawn as the foreleg of a bull. A younger assistant hovers over the map, pointing at each cluster and murmuring their names, practicing for the night's work. He stops, mid-word, to correct himself, frowning. If I miscall a star, he says, I might mislead the god's timing. His tone is dead serious, as if this mistake could be catastrophic not for him, but for the cosmic order itself. In one corner, an older astronomer is carving marks into a palm-ribbed tally board. These are records of heliacal risings, the first annual appearance of certain stars at dawn. He shows you a row of entries marked with a star symbol and another marked with what looks like a droplet of water. This, he says, tapping the droplet, is Sirius the goddess Sopdet. When she rises, the Nile will flood. He grins wryly and adds, mostly. It's the ancient Egyptian version of a weather forecast, accurate enough to stake your harvest on, but not entirely immune to surprise. You notice a curious little ritual before each set of measurements. The observer dips his hands into a shallow basin of water, then shakes them dry into the sunlight. It clears the dust, he explains, so the sky can see me clearly. Whether this is practical science or symbolic connection, you can't tell, but the motion is hypnotic, and you find yourself imagining astronomers in other lands doing something similar for entirely different reasons. In another alcove, you find something unexpected, a row of polished bronze mirrors, angled toward the beams of sunlight from above. These aren't for vanity. The priests use them to channel light onto specific instruments, or to bounce a glint toward a marker on the far wall, aligning it precisely. One apprentice shows you how he adjusts the angle with the patience of someone tuning a musical instrument. The stars have their music, he says with a shrug, but they don't play it for the impatient. You wander to the far wall, where an inscription runs from floor to ceiling, a calendar. It's divided into 3 seasons: Akit, flooding; Pare, growing; and Shemu, harvest. Within each are 30-day months, marked with notations about festivals, offerings, and astronomical events. You can almost see the way the sky has been woven into the temple's very heartbeat. Every feast, every sacrifice, every procession synced to movements far above your head. Then, in a corner so dim you almost miss it, there's a small clay model of the temple itself. But this is no simple miniature. It's oriented precisely, with tiny markers for the sunrise and sunset points during the solstices. One of the younger astronomers notices you studying it and leans in. On the longest day, he says, the sun will strike straight into the sanctuary, not 1 finger width off. His pride is palpable, but so is a faint edge of mystery, because he admits they can't fully explain how the builders achieved this perfection without the instruments they have now. A burst of laughter breaks the quiet. 2 apprentices are arguing in the doorway about whether the moon is a god or just a lamp in the sky. One claims it's the boat of Khonsu, the lunar deity, while the other insists it's more like a divine reflector, bouncing sunlight back at night. You leave them to their friendly bickering, silently rooting for both sides just to keep the debate going another 1,000 years. As the daylight shifts, the beams of light across the floor slide slowly toward the wall, a silent reminder that even here inside this still, stone chamber the world is always moving. You step outside into the corridor again, and for a moment your eyes struggle to adjust. The air feels different now, as if you've just stepped back from the edge of something vast and incomprehensible. Somewhere in the distance, you hear the clang of metal on stone, the sound of another kind of precision, entirely the making of sacred tools. You follow the metallic rhythm through a narrowing corridor that smells faintly of charred wood and resin. The sound grows sharper with each step, echoing off the high, bare walls until you turn a corner and step into a workshop that feels both ancient and oddly familiar here. The air is warm and alive with motion. Sparks leap in tiny arcs from a forge in the far corner, while the scent of heated copper and fresh-cut cedar fills your lungs. Several artisans bare-shouldered there, hands stained with soot and ochre, move in a practiced dance around stone benches and racks of tools. You've stumbled into the heart of the temple's sacred equipment production, where precision is every bit as important as in the observatory. You just left. One craftsman is hammering a strip of gold so thin it shivers like a leaf in the breeze. He glances up, smiling faintly. For the bark of Aman, he explains, it must be perfect or the god will see the flaw. Whether he means that literally or symbolically, his tone leaves no room for doubt. This isn't mere ornament, it's divine interface hardware. Nearby, another man works a lathe of sorts, rotating a length of polished sycamore wood against a sharp chisel. Thin curls fall to the floor, releasing a fresh, sweet scent that cuts through the metallic temps of the forge. The wood will become a handle for a ceremonial scepter, but not before it's rubbed with oils, wrapped in linen, and whispered over by a purification priest. Historians still argue whether these extra steps were meant to bless the object or simply to protect its integrity before use. But the reverence here makes it feel like both. You spot a table laden with strange, delicate items, a row of small copper blades shaped like fish, incense burners carved to resemble lotus flowers, and curious bronze tweezers. One of the younger apprentices catches you eyeing the tweezers and chuckles. For plucking, he says, but not the way you think. We plucked the hair from the god's statue before dressing it. The idea is both whimsical and oddly intimate divine. Grooming as an act of devotion. In the farthest alcove, a pair of artisans are engaged in something more experimental, mixing pigments in shallow alabaster bowls. The colors are shockingly vibrant ultramarine blue ground from lapis, deep red from ochre, shimmering green from malachite. They explain that these aren't just paints, but symbolic energies. Blue for the heavens, green for renewal, red for the fierce power of protection. They'll be used to repaint reliefs or statues before festivals, renewing the god's image so it doesn't fade. In the eyes of both humans and divine beings, one of them leans in conspiratorially and admits that sometimes the priests request colors outside the traditional range just to impress visiting dignitaries. He says with a grin, the gods don't mind as long as the symbolism stays intact. A diplomatic loophole, ancient Egypt style. Along the wall hangs a display of finished tools, broad copper adzes, gold-tipped staffs, intricately inlaid offering bowls. Each object has a small tag of papyrus tied to it, recording not only its purpose but the exact phase of the moon during its creation. Timing matters, the workshop master tells you. An adze made under a waning moon cuts away evil. One made under a waxing moon calls in blessings. You wonder how many temples across the Nile followed the same lunar rulebook, or if this was one of those local traditions historians will never fully pin down. You're drawn to a quieter corner where an older man sits alone, working with what looks like a strip of soft leather. His fingers are quick but gentle, braiding fine cords and threading in beads of faience. He tells you this is a protective necklace for a priest who will lead the next sunrise ceremony. Every knot, he says, is a word, and if you mistie the sentence, the meaning changes. You think back to the astronomers debating the moon, and realize how many aspects of temple life hinge on precision, not just in tools and buildings, but in thought itself. A sudden gust from the open doorway stirs the fine gold leaf on one workbench, sending a piece fluttering toward you like a butterfly. You catch it instinctively, its weight almost non-existent. The artisan laughs softly and says, "You can keep that, your fingers are now blessed by Hathor." Whether he's serious or teasing, you can't quite tell, but you tuck the sliver carefully into your palm as though it might dissolve if you're careless. Then the rhythm change, hammering slows. Voices quiet. You realize everyone is pausing to listen. Somewhere beyond the workshop, a low horn call sounds 3 times. The master nods toward the inner temple. They've brought something in from the river. Time for us to see. Curiosity pulls you. Back into the corridor, gold slivers still pressed between your fingers. Wondering what kind of arrival could bring work in this temple to a standstill. You hurry down the corridor, the echoes of the horn still ringing in your ears. The temple seems to hold its breath as you approach a grand set of doors, heavy with bronze fittings and carved with the symbols of Horus and Isis. The guards nod respectfully as you pass. This is no ordinary entrance, but the gateway to the inner sanctum where the sacred rituals unfold. Inside, the space opens into a large, dimly lit hall. The air is thick with incense smoke that curls lazily toward the high ceiling, where painted stars shimmer faintly in the torchlight. At the center stands a magnificent statue of the god Amen, its stone surface gleaming faintly as though lit from within. Around its base, priests in elaborately pleated linen robes prepare for a ceremony, their voices low and reverent. A hush falls over the assembly as a priest approaches, carrying a ceremonial staff topped with a gilded ankh. The staff seems to pulse with energy, and you feel the hairs on your arms stand on end. This is no mere ornament, but a symbol of divine authority, linking the mortal world with the eternal. You watch as offerings are placed before the statue, fresh lotus blossoms, golden cakes, and small jars of the precious oils you saw being prepared. Earlier, the head priest raises his hands, and the congregation responds with a chant that fills the hall with an otherworldly resonance. In a moment that feels suspended in time, the head priest lifts a curved dagger, its blade shimmering in the firelight. The crowd watches in silence as he makes a small, precise incision on the palm of his own hand, letting a drop of blood fall onto the altar. Blood sacrifice here is not about violence, but a sacred exchanger, gift of life to sustain the gods' favor. Historians still argue whether these rituals were more symbolic or carried literal consequences for the participants. As the chant reaches its crescendo, incense smoke spirals upward, and the temple seems to breathe with a life of its own. You realize that the power you sense is not just in the objects or the words, but in the shared belief of everyone present. After the ceremony, you step back into the corridor, the weight of the ritual lingering in the cool air. The temple's mysteries continue to unfold, each chamber revealing new layers of devotion, power, and the eternal dance between mortals and gods. The temple's pulse carries you onward through winding passageways, now quieter, more intimate. You find yourself in a chamber where the air feels cooler, scented with dried herbs and faint whispers of myrrh. Here, the focus shifts from grand ceremony to personal devotion, the private rituals that connect everyday worshippers to the divine. Along the walls, small niches hold statues no taller than a child, each representing a different aspect of the gods: mercy, justice, fertility, protection. These tiny figures are meant to be touched, held, and prayed to in moments of need. You pick up a smooth alabaster statuette of Bastet, the cat goddess, feeling its cool surface warm slowly in your palm. A middle-aged priest explains that this chamber is dedicated to healing rituals. The sick and weary come here, bearing petitions and small offerings, seeking relief from ailments that ranged from simple headaches to more mysterious illnesses. You can almost hear their whispered prayers mingling with the soft rustle of linen and the quiet murmur of incantation. In the center of the room, A low stone basin overflows with water from a nearby spring believed to carry the goddess' blessing. Priests anoint the sick with this water, sometimes mixing it with honey or ground herbs. The smell is sweet and medicinal, reminding you a bit of modern herbal teas, though the promise here is more spiritual than scientific. Historians still argue whether these healing rituals were based more on faith or empirical knowledge, but here, in the hushed air of this chamber, the distinction feels irrelevant. The power lies in the touch, the words, and the belief that the gods are watching. Nearby, you notice a small table laden with amulets, charms, and tiny scrolls inscribed with protective spells. Each item is carefully wrapped in linen and blessed before being given to a supplicant. One particularly curious amulet, shaped like a scarab beetle, catches your eye. The priest explains it represents transformation and renewal, a symbol that life always finds a way to persist. The atmosphere is intimate and almost tender, a stark contrast to the grand spectacle of earlier sacrifices. It's easy to imagine the whispered hopes and fears of those who visited this place, their faith as fragile and fierce as a candle flame in the temple's vast shadows. As you step back into the corridor, the scent of myrrh lingers on your skin, a quiet reminder of the many ways the temple touched every aspect of life, from the public to the deeply personal. You move deeper into the labyrinthine heart of the temple, where light thins and silence grows heavy, punctuated only by the distant drip of water echoing through stone chambers. This is the place where secrets are kept, not just the sacred texts or ceremonial tools, but the power struggles that simmer beneath the polished surface of divine worship. The walls here are bare but for faint scratches, and graffiti messages left by workers, priests, and perhaps even visitors over centuries. One inscription catches your eye, a hurried scrawl, a plea for mercy, a curse on an enemy, and a prayer for protection. It's a raw human voice trapped in stone, reminding you that even in a place of gods, mortal fears and hopes never vanished. Ahead, a narrow staircase spirals downward into the temple's subterranean vaults. You descend carefully, the air growing cooler and damper, the silence wrapping around you like a shroud. This is where treasures and offerings accumulate: golden statues, intricately carved ivory, jars of precious oils and perfume stored under heavy lock and ritual. One vault, opened briefly for your visit, reveals a dazzling trove: gold amulets shaped like falcons, silver mirrors with delicate filigree, and a magnificent ceremonial mask of a pharaoh, its eyes gleaming with inlaid lapis lazuli. Yet even amid such splendor, there's a weight of unease. These riches represent not just devotion, but immense power, and with power come politics. You overhear a whispered conversation between two priests debating the legitimacy of the temple's authority. One insists that gods speak only through the high priest, while the other argues for a council of elders. Historians still argue whether these power struggles shaped the course of Egyptian religion, or were merely minor squabbles in an otherwise unified faith. A sudden sound, soft footsteps, and the clink of metal alerts you to the presence of a guard. He carries a small wooden box, inside which lie tablets inscribed with newly decreed temple laws. These edicts regulate everything from who may enter certain chambers to the distribution of offerings, reinforcing the temple's role not just as a spiritual center, but as a political powerhouse. You realize that beneath the gleaming surface of gold and incense lies a complex web of control, where the divine and the earthly mingle in uneasy balance. The temple is a kingdom within a kingdom, its priests wielding influence that extends far beyond ritual. As you ascend back to the sunlit corridors, the weight of this hidden world lingers. The temple is a place of worship, yes, but also of human ambition, intrigue, and the eternal quest for power. Ascending from the shadowed vaults, you find yourself in the temple's outer courtyard, alive again with the hum of daily activity. The scent of fresh papyrus and burning incense mingles with the earthy smell of mud bricks and sun-warmed stone. This is the public face of the temple, the space where priests, pilgrims, traders, and townsfolk intersect in a delicate dance of faith, commerce, and social order. Children run barefoot over the sandy ground, chasing each other around the bases of massive columns carved with stories of gods and kings. Women in brightly dyed linen skirts gather near fountains, filling alabaster jars with water, while vendors call out, hawking offerings like fresh flowers, baked goods, and small statuettes. You notice the laughter joyful, unrestricted, against the stone walls, a stark contrast to the solemnity of the inner sanctuaries. Here, the temple's influence extends beyond the divine. It's a hub for law and education, a place where scribes teach apprentices how to read and write the sacred script. You catch sight of a young boy carefully copying hieroglyphs onto a piece of papyrus, his tongue poking out in concentration. Nearby, a group of elders debates loudly over the calendar, their arguments punctuated by animated gestures. Yet even amidst this lively scene, there is an unmistakable hierarchy. Priests in their immaculate white robes move with deliberate grace, receiving bowed greetings and silent respect. Their authority is unquestioned, a living embodiment of the God's will on earth. Traders pay tribute before conducting business, and those seeking justice approach with humble deference. Historians still argue whether the temple's economic role was as benevolent as tradition suggests, or whether it operated as a means of social control. Perhaps both are true, tangled like the braided cords worn by the priests, as the sun begins to dip below the horizon. Casting long shadows over the courtyard, you feel the rhythm of temple life pulse through your veins, a blend of sacred ritual, daily toil, and human connection, all woven into the tapestry of ancient Egypt's soul. You tread toward the temple's massive outer gates, feeling the cool stone underfoot as dusk settles like a soft blanket. The fading light spills over statues of gods and kings, their carved faces caught between shadow and glow, silent witnesses to centuries of devotion, power, and mystery. Around you, the temple hums, gently less the bustle of the day and more a whispered breath, as if it's exhaling, settling in for the night here. In this final stretch of your journey, you reflect on the temple's many faces, the grand ceremonies, where priests wielded sacred power, the workshops where divine tools were crafted with care, the secret vaults where treasures and ambitions lay guarded, the quiet chambers of healing and personal faith, and the bustling courtyard alive with life and ritual. You remember the scent of incense curling through stone corridors, the cool smoothness of amulets resting in your palm, the warm glow of lamps illuminating ancient words, and the way sunlight pierced the sanctuaries at just the right moment. These moments weren't accidents, but deliberate acts of devotion and design, a dialogue between human and divine. Historians still argue whether the temples were primarily centers of religious worship, economic power, or political control, but as you stand here beneath the endless sky, it feels less like an either-or question and more like a living, breathing unity. The temple was a world unto itself, a place where mortals sought the gods, where faith and fear intertwined, and where power was both wielded and surrendered. As you turn away, the last rays of the sun touch the temple's stones, setting them ablaze with golden light, and you carry with you a sense of having walked not just through a building, but through the heart of ancient Egypt's soul. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. As your journey through the temple fades softly into memory, imagine the gentle stillness settling over the Nile at dusk, the way the sky slips from gold to deep indigo, the soft ripple of water whispering secrets to the stars. The temple's stones, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, hold those secrets patiently, cradling the echoes of chants and the flicker of oil lamps. You breathe in that quiet calm, feeling the day's bustle dissolve into a serene twilight. The gods, once so close and commanding, now seem like distant friends watching over the night, their presence a gentle comfort rather than a call to duty. Allow yourself to drift on that comforting current, carried by the rhythm of ancient prayers and the timeless pulse of the earth beneath you. Let your thoughts settle like the fine desert sand, light and soft, slipping through your fingers tonight. The temple sleeps, but its stories, its rituals, and its power linger, folded into the quiet spaces of your mind. Let them inspire gentle dreams where history and mystery blend, and the past whispers softly just for you. Good night and sweet dreams.